They called it the Great Silence. 1,000 years ago, humanity's screams echoed across the galaxy as the Zephyrian Collective crushed every human world, every station, every ship. The species that once dared to challenge the cosmic order was erased so thoroughly that even their memory became forbidden. But the Collective made one critical error. They assumed extinction and defeat were the same thing. Now, as mysterious ships bearing impossible technology emerge from the void, as entire Zephyrian fleets vanish without a trace, and as ancient human ruins begin transmitting signals that shouldn't exist, the galaxy trembles with a terrifying realization. Humanity didn't die. They evolved. They learned. And after a millennium of preparation in the darkness between stars, they've returned not as refugees or rebels, but as something far more dangerous. Conquerors who have transcended every limitation that once made them vulnerable. The prey has become the apex predator, and the hunt for vengeance has begun. Admiral Kexvar of the Zephyrian Collective stared at the holographic display with growing unease. The Nexus Prime monitoring station hung in the void like a crystalline spider, its sensors reaching across 3-star systems. For 800 years it had faithfully recorded every ship movement, every energy signature, every whisper of activity in this sector of space. Today, it showed something impossible. "Run the diagnostic again," Kexvar commanded, his forearms gesturing dismissively at the readings. Lieutenant Zarth, a young officer with the distinctive blue-scaled skin of her species, manipulated the controls with nervous precision. "Sir, I've run it 17 times. The readings are consistent. 3 collective patrol ships disappeared from sensors exactly 14 standard hours ago. No distress signals, no debris fields, no energy signatures indicating weapons fire." The Admiral's mandibles clicked in frustration. Ships didn't simply vanish. The Zephyrian Collective had ruled this galaxy for over 2,000 years, their technology so advanced that even the memory of serious resistance had faded into myth. The last species foolish enough to challenge them had been the humans, and that problem had been solved permanently a millennium ago. "Perhaps a solar storm," suggested Commander Thisisra from her position at the tactical station. "Or gravitational anomalies from the binary pulsar system." Kexvar considered this, but the explanation felt hollow. The missing ships had been patrolling the Outer Rim territories, areas long pacified and considered safer than the core worlds. The Vindication, the Absolute Order, and the Harmony's Edge were all modern vessels, equipped with the finest sensors and defensive systems the Collective could produce. For all 3 to disappear simultaneously suggested either catastrophic equipment failure or, "Sir," Saratha's voice cracked with tension. "I'm detecting an anomalous signature approaching from the Kepler Void." The Kepler Void. Even veteran spacers spoke of it in hushed tones. It was a region of space so empty, so devoid of stars or planets, that navigation computers often refused to plot courses through it. Nothing lived there. Nothing had ever lived there. "On screen," Kexvar ordered. The main display shifted, showing the endless black of deep space. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, like a predator emerging from tall grass, something began to resolve out of the darkness. The ship was unlike anything in the Collective's databases. Where Zephyrian vessels were elegant curves of living metal that seemed to flow like liquid, this craft appeared to have been carved from shadow itself. It was massive, easily 3 times the size of their battlecruiser, but its hull seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Strange geometric patterns covered its surface, lines and angles that hurt to look at directly, as if they existed in more dimensions than the eye could process. "Attempting to hail," Thisra announced, her voice steady despite the obvious strain. Static filled the communications array, followed by silence. Then, impossibly, a voice responded. It spoke in perfect Zephyrian standard, but there was something wrong with the intonation, something that made everyone on the bridge unconsciously step backward.
"Attention, collective vessel.
This is the retribution of the Terran Renaissance. We require immediate surrender of your ship and crew for processing." Kexvar's blood ran cold. Terran. That was the old word for human. But humans were extinct. He had studied the historical records himself, had even visited the monument erected on the site of their homeworld after the Collective's final victory. The Great Silence had lasted 1,000 years. "This is Admiral Kexvar of the Zephyrian Collective," he replied, fighting to keep his voice level. "I don't know what game you're playing, but humanity was destroyed long ago. Identify yourselves properly or face the consequences." Laughter echoed through the comm system, but it wasn't quite right. It was too rhythmic, too controlled, like a memory of laughter rather than the genuine article. "Destroyed," the voice repeated. And now Kexvar could hear multiple speakers. A chorus of voices speaking in perfect unison. Yes, that's what you believed. That's what we wanted you to believe. Tell me, Admiral, have you ever wondered what happened to the humans who weren't on the worlds you burned? The exploration fleets that were years deep into the void? The research stations hidden in asteroid fields? The colony ships that simply disappeared? The retribution moved closer. And now Kexavar could see details that made his skin crawl. The ship's hull wasn't smooth as it had appeared from a distance. It was covered in what looked like scales, each one the size of a shuttle, each one bearing inscriptions in a script that predated the collective's rise to power. You see, Admiral, the voice continued, you taught us a valuable lesson when you conquered our worlds. You showed us that in this galaxy, only the strongest survive. Only those willing to do anything, to sacrifice everything, to become something more than what they were, can hope to endure. We learned that lesson well. Proximity alarms began sounding throughout the bridge. The human ship had somehow closed the distance between them without registering on sensors. It now hung barely 1,000 kilometers away, close enough that Kexvar could see structures moving beneath its surface, organic-looking conduits that pulsed with sickly light. Sir, Zareth whispered, I'm reading massive energy buildups across their hull. But the signatures, they're not following any known physics models. It's like their power source exists partially outside our dimensional space. Weapons hot, Kexvar commanded. All stations prepare for combat. But even as he gave the order, he knew it was too late. The human ship didn't fire weapons in any conventional sense. Instead, space around the Nexus Prime monitoring station began to ripple, as if reality itself was being folded and twisted. The station's defensive shields, which could withstand the fury of a star going nova, simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not overloaded. They stopped being real. What followed wasn't a battle so much as a dissection. Tendrils of force reached out from the retribution, each one guided with surgical precision. They passed through the station's hull as if it were made of mist, and wherever they touched, Zephyrian crew members simply vanished. Not vaporized, not killed. They were there one moment and gone the next, leaving only empty uniforms that crumpled to the deck. All hands, abandon ship, Kexvar screamed, but his words were lost in the chaos. The escape pods were launching, but half of them disappeared before they could clear the station's hull. The other half hung motionless in space, their occupants visible through the transparent aluminum viewports, faces frozen in expressions of absolute terror. The Admiral found himself alone on the bridge, his crew gone, his ship dying around him. The human voice spoke again, but now it seemed to come from inside his own head. We spent 1,000 years preparing for this moment, Admiral. 1,000 years learning from our defeat, adapting, evolving, becoming something your kind cannot comprehend. We studied every species in this galaxy, absorbed their knowledge, integrated their strengths. We became something that exists partially outside the normal flow of space and time, something that can reach through dimensions your science doesn't even have names for. Kexvar tried to speak, but found that his vocal cords no longer responded to his will. The bridge around him was dissolving, its atoms being reorganized into patterns that served the newcomer's needs. But most importantly, the voice continued, we learned patience. We learned to wait, to plan, to prepare. And now, after 10 centuries of silence, humanity has returned, not as the desperate species you once conquered, but as something infinitely more dangerous. We are no longer bound by the limitations of flesh or time or the crude physics that govern lesser beings. Through the dissolving viewports, Kexvar could see more ships emerging from the void. Hundreds of them, each one a twisted amalgamation of technology and something else, something organic and alien and wrong. They moved like living things, like predators circling wounded prey. Your 3 patrol ships were just the beginning, the voice explained with mock patience. Each one gave us valuable intelligence about your current capabilities, your weaknesses, your fears. We know where every collective ship is positioned. We know the location of every world, every station, every hiding place. And now, the real work begins. The last thing Admiral Kexvar saw before his consciousness was absorbed into the Retribution's collective intelligence was a star map appearing in his mind. It showed the entire galaxy, with thousands of red dots indicating collective positions. One by one, those dots began winking out. Far across the galaxy, on the core world of Zephyr Prime, Chancellor Vostar was enjoying what he didn't yet know would be his final meal when the first reports began arriving. Patrol ships missing. Monitoring stations going dark. Colony worlds reporting impossible sightings before their communications cut out entirely. At first, he assumed it was some sort of equipment failure, perhaps a cascading system malfunction in the Outer Rim territories. The collective was vast, spanning tens of thousands of worlds across 3 galactic arms. Technical problems were inevitable. But as the reports continued to pour in, a pattern emerged that made his blood run cold. The attacks, if they could be called that, were following the exact same routes that human exploration fleets had used 1,000 years ago. The missing ships were vanishing at coordinates that corresponded to ancient human waypoints and supply depots. Sir, his aide, a nervous young Zephyrian named Kessler, approached with obvious reluctance. We've just received a transmission from the Outer Rim Defense Network. It's unusual. Define unusual, Vostar commanded. Though he was beginning to suspect, he didn't want to know the answer. It's in an ancient human dialect, sir. Pre-conquest era. Our linguistic computers are struggling to translate, but the basic message appears to be a declaration of intent. The Chancellor's mandibles clicked nervously. Play it. The speakers crackled to life and a voice emerged that seemed to come from the depths of space itself. It spoke in the harsh, consonant-heavy tongue that had once echoed through human colonies across the galaxy. People of the Zephyrian Collective. The translation scrolled across his screen. You who celebrated our extinction, who erected monuments to your victory over humanity, who taught your children that we were a cautionary tale about the fate of those who oppose the natural order, we have a message for you. The transmission paused, and Vostar found himself leaning forward despite his fear. We are not extinct. We never were. While you grew complacent in your victory, we were learning. While you celebrated our defeat, we were evolving. While you forgot about us, we were preparing. The great silence is over. Humanity has returned, and we bring with us 1,000 years of accumulated knowledge, 1,000 years of patient planning, and 1,000 years of focused hatred. The message ended, but somehow the silence that followed was more terrifying than any threat could have been. Vostar stared at the communications console, his mind struggling to process what he had just heard. In the space of a single day, humanity had announced its return to a galaxy that had long since forgotten their existence. But if the reports were accurate, they hadn't returned as the same species that had been defeated a millennium ago. They had become something else entirely. Something that could make ships disappear without a trace and reach across impossible distances to deliver messages of vengeance. As night fell on Zephyr Prime, citizens looked up at the stars with growing unease. For the first time in 1,000 years, the galaxy no longer felt safe. Somewhere in the darkness between worlds, an ancient enemy had returned, with capabilities that defied understanding, and intentions that promised nothing but retribution for crimes committed long ago. The age of silence was ending, and the age of return had begun. Dr. Elena Vasquez opened her eyes to darkness so complete it felt like drowning in ink. For a moment, panic clawed at her consciousness as fragmented memories struggled to reassemble themselves. The laboratory on Lunar Station. The collective fleet appearing like deadly flowers blooming in space. The desperate evacuation as plasma fire consumed everything she had worked for. Then the memories sharpened, became more recent. The awakening chambers. The neural integration protocols. The choice that hadn't really been a choice at all. Welcome back, Elena, a voice said, though it didn't come through her ears. It spoke directly into her mind. Warm and familiar yet fundamentally different from human speech. You've been sleeping for 947 years, 3 months and 16 days. She tried to sit up, but her body felt strange, disconnected. When she looked down at herself, she gasped. Her skin had taken on a faint luminescence, and beneath it, she could see networks of something that looked like neural pathways but glowed with soft blue light. Her hands, when she raised them, moved with impossible precision and grace. What have we become? She whispered. Something necessary, the voice replied, and now she recognized it as belonging to Marcus Chen, her old research partner. But Marcus had died during the evacuation, cut down by Zephyrian shock troops as he tried to upload their research to the escape pods. Marcus? She spoke his name like a prayer. In a way, he answered, and suddenly she could feel his presence, not physically but as a warm consciousness touching the edges of her own thoughts. We're all here, Elena, every human who chose the Transcendence Protocol. We exist now as both individuals and as part of something greater. Memory returned in waves, the desperate flight from Lunar Station as the collective's forces closed in. Captain Harrison's impossible decision to take their research vessel not to the inner colonies for a futile last stand, but out into the void. beyond the galaxy's edge where they might have time to complete the work that could save their species. The Transcendence Protocol had been theoretical then, a mad gamble based on quantum consciousness research and dimensional physics that pushed the boundaries of human understanding. The idea that consciousness could exist independently of organic matter, that minds could be preserved and enhanced in quantum substrate matrices while bodies were rebuilt from the ground up using nanotechnology and exotic matter. How many of us survived the process? Alina asked, though she was beginning to understand that survival wasn't quite the right word. All of them, Marcus replied. 732,419 human minds preserved at the moment of transcendence and rebuilt over the course of nearly a millennium. We became something the collective could never have imagined. Something that exists partially outside the normal constraints of space and time. Elena stood, marveling at how her new body moved. It was still recognizably human in shape, but she could feel the improvements, the enhancements that made her previous form seem clumsy and fragile by comparison. Her senses extended far beyond normal human ranges, and she could perceive electromagnetic fields, gravitational variations, even the quantum foam that underlay reality itself. "Where are we?" she asked. "The Forge," Marcus replied, and suddenly Elena's enhanced senses could perceive the vast structure around them. It was a space habitat beyond anything humanity had ever conceived, a hollow sphere nearly the size of a moon, its inner surface covered with construction bays, research facilities, and what looked like gardens of crystalline trees that pulsed with their own inner light.
We built this?
She breathed. "We built much more than this." Another voice joined the conversation, and Elena recognized Dr. Sarah Kim, the xenobiologist who had theorized that consciousness might be the fundamental force of the universe rather than an emergent property of complex matter. "Would you like to see what 1,000 years of focused development can accomplish?" The walls around Elena became transparent, revealing the space beyond the forge. What she saw made her enhanced mind struggle to process the implications. Ships filled the void, but not ships as humanity had once known them. These vessels seemed to be grown rather than built, their hulls covered in organic-looking structures that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Some were clearly designed for war, bristling with weapons that bent space around themselves. Others were obviously research vessels, their sensor arrays reaching out like the tentacles of some cosmic jellyfish. But most impressive were the constructors. Massive ships that seemed to be consuming asteroids and rebuilding them into something else entirely. As Elena watched, one of these leviathans approached a rocky planetoid and extended tendrils that began dismantling it at the molecular level, sorting its component atoms and feeding them into internal fabrication systems that produced more ships, more habitats, more of whatever was needed.
We learned from the collective's victory over us, Sarah explained.
They won because they had superior numbers, better technology, and the luxury of fighting on their terms. So we made sure that when we returned, we would have all three advantages. "How many ships?" Elena asked, though she was beginning to realize she could access this information directly through the quantum link that connected all transcended humans. Currently active, approximately 800,000 vessels of various classes. Under construction? Another 2 million, with production capacity doubling every 18 months. We've been very busy while you were sleeping. Elena's enhanced mind processed these numbers and their implications. Humanity had returned to the galaxy not as refugees or rebels, but as a technological civilization that could match or exceed anything the collective could field. But more than that, they had become something that the rigid hierarchical Zephyrians could never understand or effectively counter. "Show me what we've learned about our enemies," she requested. Information flowed directly into her consciousness, 1,000 years of patient observation and analysis. The Zephyrian collective had grown complacent in their victory, their technology stagnating as they focused on administration rather than innovation. They ruled through overwhelming force and rigid bureaucracy, but their military doctrines hadn't evolved significantly in centuries. More importantly, they had made the same mistake that had doomed humanity originally. They had underestimated their opponents. The collective genuinely believed that humans were extinct, that the threat had been eliminated completely. Their intelligence networks showed no awareness of human activity in the intergalactic void, no preparation for a return that they considered impossible. "They've forgotten us," Elena realized. 1,000 years of peace has made them soft. "Exactly," Marcus agreed. "But we haven't forgotten them. Every slight, every murdered world, every family torn apart, we remember it all with perfect clarity. The quantum substrate doesn't allow for the mercy of forgetting. Elena could feel the weight of collective memory, the accumulated grief and rage of an entire species that had been pushed to the brink of extinction. But she could also feel something else, a cold, calculating intelligence that had learned from defeat and transformed it into strength. "What's the plan?" she asked. "Phase 1 began 3 days ago," Sarah replied. "Reconnaissance and elimination of outer rim defenses. We're systematically removing their early warning networks and isolated military assets, making them blind to our movements." Elena's consciousness expanded, connecting to the broader network of transcended humanity. Suddenly she could see through 1,000 different viewpoints as human forces struck across the galaxy's edge. The attacks were surgical in their precision, designed not just to eliminate targets but to gather intelligence about current collective capabilities and weaknesses. She watched through the sensors of the Retribution as it approached another Zephyrian monitoring station. The station's crew detected the approach too late, their communication systems somehow disrupted before they could send a warning. The human ship didn't destroy the facility. Instead, it enveloped it in fields of exotic matter that existed partially outside normal space-time. The Zephyrian crew found themselves frozen between moments, their consciousness suspended while human analysts extracted every piece of information from their minds and computers. Ship movements, defense protocols, political intelligence, technical specifications, nothing was overlooked. When the process was complete, the station simply ceased to exist, its atoms redistributed to more useful purposes. "We're not just fighting them," Elena realized. "We're studying them, learning everything about how they think, how they fight, how they've organized their society. Knowledge is the ultimate weapon." Dr. Pitt. Kim agreed. "The collective defeated us because they understood our weaknesses better than we understood theirs. We won't make that mistake again." Phase 2 was already beginning, Elena discovered as she accessed more of the collective intelligence. Human infiltrator units, beings that could reshape their physical forms to mimic any species in the galaxy, were already moving through collective space. They had spent decades establishing false identities, gaining positions in government and military organizations, preparing for the moment when their true nature would be revealed. "How long before they realize what's happening?" Elena asked. "They already know something is wrong," Marcus replied. "But they don't understand the scope of what they're facing. Their intelligence agencies are reporting isolated incidents, equipment failures, communication disruptions. They're responding with standard security protocols, increasing patrols, and checking their systems for technical malfunctions." Elena could see the collective's response through the eyes of human infiltrators embedded in their command structure. Chancellor Vostar was calling emergency sessions, demanding explanations for the communications blackouts and missing ships. Military commanders were scrambling to reinforce critical positions, but they were reacting to shadows, fighting an enemy they couldn't locate or understand.
"They're treating this like a conventional military threat," Elena observed. "They have no idea we've transcended the limitations that made us vulnerable before."
Which brings us to Phase 3, Sarah said, and Elena could feel anticipation rippling through the collective consciousness.
"Direct confrontation with their main fleets. We need to test our capabilities against their best weapons and tactics before moving on to the core worlds. I, T, E, WED, L, I, could." Through the quantum link, Elena could sense preparation activities across thousands of human ships. The fleet was organizing itself for major operations, with battle groups forming around the massive Forge-class vessels that served as mobile construction and command centers. These ships were marvels of transcended human engineering, capable of manufacturing entire fleets while in transit and coordinating the activities of millions of smaller units. But what impressed Elena most was the coordination between individual human consciousnesses. In their original form, humanity had been limited by communication delays and the individual processing power of organic brains. Now, thousands of minds could work together as a single entity while still maintaining their individual perspectives and personalities. "We've become what the philosophers always dreamed of," Elena mused. "A true collective intelligence that doesn't sacrifice individual identity. And our enemies have no defense against it," Marcus added. "The collective operates through rigid hierarchies and predetermined protocols. They can't adapt quickly enough to counter an opponent that thinks and acts as a unified entity while maintaining the creativity and unpredictability of individual minds." Elena felt herself being drawn into the planning process for Phase 3. Her expertise in quantum physics and dimensional mechanics was needed for the next stage of operations. The human fleet was preparing to engage the collective's third battle group, a formation of 12 capital ships and their escorts that had been dispatched to investigate the disturbances in the Outer Rim. We're going to reveal ourselves, she realized. Partially, Sarah corrected. We'll show them enough to make them understand that humanity has returned, but not enough for them to grasp the true scope of what we've become. Fear and uncertainty will be our allies in this phase. The battle plans flowed through Elena's consciousness, elegant in their simplicity and terrifying in their implications. The human fleet wouldn't engage in conventional combat. Instead, they would demonstrate capabilities that would shake the collective's understanding of what was possible. Ships that could phase in and out of normal space-time, weapons that attacked through dimensions the Zephyrians didn't know existed, defensive systems that could make their vessels immune to conventional attack by existing partially outside the target universe. When do we begin? Elena asked. Now, Marcus replied, and suddenly Elena could feel the vast human fleet beginning to move. Hundreds of thousands of ships emerging from the intergalactic void, their exotic drives bending space around them as they accelerated toward their targets. The return of humanity was about to become impossible for the collective to ignore or deny. After 1,000 years of silence, the galaxy was about to learn that some species were too dangerous to truly destroy, too adaptable to remain defeated, and too patient to forgive the crimes committed against them. Phase 3 was beginning, and with it the true test of what transcended humanity had become. Fleet Admiral Thiskar had commanded the Zephyrian Collective's 3rd battle group for over 3 decades, and in that time he had never encountered anything that truly challenged his understanding of warfare. The 12 capital ships under his command represented the pinnacle of collective military engineering, each one capable of sterilizing a planet or breaking the defensive lines of any known hostile force. Now, as he stared at the tactical display showing impossible sensor readings, he wondered if his career had prepared him for what he was about to face. "Status report," he commanded, his forearms working efficiently across multiple control surfaces. Commander Zeslin, his tactical officer, replied with barely controlled tension in her voice. "Sir, we have confirmed contact with unidentified vessels at coordinates 77 Mark 49. Initial count shows 36 ships, but the signatures are inconsistent. Define inconsistent." "They appear to be phasing in and out of our sensor range, sir. One moment our instruments show solid contacts, the next they barely register as gravitational anomalies. It's as if they exist only partially in normal space." Admiral Thiskar studied the readings himself, his experienced mind trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The unknown vessels were arranged in a formation that suggested military discipline, but their energy signatures were unlike anything in the collective's extensive databases. More disturbing was the way they seemed to flicker between dimensions, becoming solid and real one moment, then fading to mere shadows the next. "Attempts at communication?" he asked. "Negative response to all standard hailing frequencies," Zeslin reported. "But sir, we are detecting structured electromagnetic emissions from their formation. It appears to be some form of ancient human dialect." The bridge fell silent. Every officer present knew the history of the collective's greatest victory, the complete eradication of humanity a millennium ago. The possibility that these could be human vessels was both impossible and terrifying. "Play the transmission," Thiskar ordered. The speakers crackled to life, and a voice emerged that spoke in the harsh consonants of pre-conquest human standard. The translation appeared on screens throughout the bridge, but Thiskar found himself following the alien cadence even without understanding the words. "Zephyrian vessels, this is the Terran Renaissance Fleet. Designation Vengeance Formation Alpha. You are ordered to heave to and prepare for boarding. Any attempt to flee or fight will result in your immediate absorption into our collective intelligence. You have 60 seconds to comply." Admiral Thiskar felt his blood chill. Terran Renaissance Fleet. Collective intelligence. These weren't mere survivors from some forgotten human colony. These were beings claiming to represent a resurrected humanity, and their casual mention of absorption suggested capabilities that defied conventional understanding. "Sir," the communications officer interrupted. "We're receiving detailed intelligence reports from across the sector. Over 40 monitoring stations have gone dark in the past 72 hours, and 3 patrol fleets have reported engagement with unknown vessels before losing contact entirely." The Admiral's mandibles clicked nervously. A coordinated attack across multiple systems suggested either a massive invasion force or enemies with capabilities that allowed them to be in many places simultaneously. Neither possibility was reassuring. "All ships, battle stations," Thiskar commanded. "Prepare for engagement with unknown hostiles. Standard formation Delta 7. The 12 capital ships of the 3rd Battle Group moved with practiced efficiency, their massive hulls bristling with weapons that could crack continents. Their escort vessels formed protective screens while sensor ships extended their instruments to maximum range, trying to get a clearer picture of what they were facing. What they discovered defied every tactical manual in the collective database. The human ships weren't just phasing in and out of normal space, they were existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Their hulls showed impossible geometries that seemed to fold in on themselves, and their energy signatures indicated power sources that drew from sources outside conventional physics. Sir, Zeslin's voice was barely steady. The unknown vessels are moving to engage, but their acceleration curves don't match their apparent mass. It's as if they're not bound by normal inertial physics. Admiral Thysiscar watched in growing horror as the human formation began its attack run. The vessels moved like living things, flowing around his defensive positions with organic grace. Their weapons, when they finally fired, weren't the familiar particle beams or plasma charges of conventional warfare. Instead, reality itself seemed to bend around the collective ships. Space-time twisted into knots that stressed hull integrity beyond design tolerances. Gravity wells appeared from nowhere, pulling escort vessels into collision courses with each other. Electromagnetic fields that existed in 11 dimensions rather than the usual 4 reached through defensive shields as if they weren't there. "Return fire," Thiscar ordered. But even as he spoke, he knew it was useless. The collective's weapons struck the human ships and passed through them like shadows. Some attacks seemed to hit solid targets, causing brief flares of energy across alien hulls, but the damage was negligible. The human vessels continued their assault as if the most powerful weapons in the galaxy were merely inconvenient distractions. "Admiral," Commander Zeslin reported with increasing panic, "the immutable truth is reporting catastrophic system failures. Their crew is disappearing, sir. One moment they're at their stations, the next their uniforms are empty." Through the tactical display, Thiscar could see one of his capital ships beginning to drift, its engines dead, its weapon ports dark. But there were no hull breaches, no signs of conventional damage. The ship was simply ceasing to function as its crew vanished without explanation. "All vessels, emergency jump to hyperspace," he commanded. "We need to report this to this quarter of guards." The order died in his throat as he realized his ships couldn't enter hyperspace. Something was preventing the transition, holding them in normal space like insects trapped in amber. The human vessels had somehow created a dimensional lock that made escape impossible. A new voice spoke over the communication system, but this time it came from inside the bridge itself, as if the speaker were standing next to each officer. "Admiral Thiscar of the Zephyrian Collective," the voice said with perfect pronunciation of his name and rank. "I am Elena Vasquez, formerly of the Human Colonial Research Division, currently serving as primary analyst for the Terran Renaissance Fleet. Your resistance is noted and will be remembered when your species faces judgment." The Admiral tried to respond, but found that his vocal cords no longer obeyed his will. Around the bridge, his officers were experiencing similar paralysis, their bodies becoming unresponsive even as their minds remained fully aware. "You are wondering how this is possible," Elena continued, her voice carrying notes of both sadness and implacable determination. "How a species you destroyed could return with capabilities that exceed your understanding? The answer is simple. We learned from our defeat." The main display activated without any input from the bridge crew, showing images that made Admiral Thiscar's enhanced mind struggle to process their implications. Human research stations hidden in the vast emptiness between galaxies, construction facilities that spanned light years, building ships from the quantum foam itself. Laboratories where consciousness was separated from matter and rebuilt in substrates that existed outside normal space-time. "When your fleets burned our worlds 1,000 years ago," Elena explained, "you made a critical assumption. You believed that destroying our planets and colonies would eliminate our species. But you forgot about our exploration fleets, our research stations, our colonies on the edges of known space. You assumed that because you could not find us, we must be dead." The images shifted to show the gradual development of transcendence technology, the painstaking process of uploading human consciousness into quantum matrices that could survive indefinitely in the void between stars. Decades of work had been compressed into time-accelerated sequences that showed the birth of a new kind of humanity. We spent our first century in exile simply surviving, learning to exist as energy patterns in quantum substrate. The second century was devoted to rebuilding our bodies, creating new physical forms that could house our enhanced consciousness. The third and fourth centuries were spent studying your civilization, infiltrating your worlds, learning your weaknesses. Admiral Thiscar felt a chill of understanding. Human agents had been operating within collective space for hundreds of years, gathering intelligence, preparing for this moment. The scope of their planning was beyond anything his species had ever attempted. The remaining 6 centuries, Elena continued, were devoted to technological development and military preparation. We became something that exists partially outside the physical universe, something that can manipulate the fundamental forces of reality itself. We transcended the limitations that made us vulnerable to your previous attack. The display now showed the current human fleet in all its terrifying glory. Millions of ships that seemed to be grown rather than built, their hulls covered in organic patterns that pulsed with bioluminescent intelligence. Weapons that could reach through dimensions to strike targets anywhere in the galaxy. Defensive systems that could make entire fleets exist only conditionally, becoming real or unreal as tactical necessity demanded. Your 3rd battle group represents approximately 0.003% of our current military capability, Elena informed him with clinical detachment. We are engaging you not because you pose a threat, but because we require current intelligence on collective military doctrine and technology. You are test subjects, not opponents. Admiral Fiskar wanted to rage at the casual dismissal of his fleet's capabilities, but he found himself fascinated despite his fear. The humans had clearly become something unprecedented in galactic history. A species that had learned to exist simultaneously in multiple dimensions, while retaining the adaptability and creativity that had made them dangerous in the first place. "What do you want from us?" he managed to ask, surprised that his voice was working again. "Information," Elena replied simply. "Current fleet dispositions, political structures, technological capabilities, military doctrines. Everything you know about how the collective operates in the modern era. And if we refuse, you will provide the information regardless. The question is whether you do so voluntarily, in which case your consciousness will be preserved and integrated into our collective intelligence, or involuntarily, in which case we simply extract what we need and discard the rest."
The choice wasn't really a choice at all, and Fiskar knew it.
His fleet was helpless against opponents who could manipulate reality itself, but perhaps he could learn something that might help his species survive what was coming. "I'll cooperate," he said, "but I want to understand what you've become. How is this level of technological advancement possible in such a short time?" Elena's laugh was genuinely amused. "Short time, Admiral. You're thinking in terms of normal space-time flow. We spent those 1,000 years in accelerated temporal frames, where subjective centuries could pass while only decades elapsed in the outside universe. We had the time to become something unprecedented. The paralysis affecting Thisiskar's crew began to fade, but they made no move to resume their duties. They could all feel the presence of the human intelligence examining their minds, sifting through memories and knowledge with gentle but inexorable thoroughness. "Your cooperation is appreciated," Elena continued, "but ultimately unnecessary. We can extract everything we need directly from your neural patterns. However, voluntary participation makes the process more pleasant for everyone involved." Through the quantum link connecting all transcended humans, Elena could feel her colleagues coordinating similar operations across dozens of star systems. The collective's military response was being systematically analyzed and catalogued, their strategies and capabilities mapped down to the smallest detail. But more than that, they were sending a message. The return of humanity wasn't just about revenge or reconquest. It was about demonstrating that some species couldn't be permanently defeated, that given enough time and motivation, intelligence could transcend any limitation imposed by physics or biology. "What happens next?" Admiral Fiskar asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Phase 4, Elena replied. "Now that we've gathered sufficient intelligence about your current military capabilities, we begin systematic elimination of your major fleet concentrations. Your core worlds will watch their protectors disappear one by one, until they understand that resistance is not only futile but ultimately counterproductive." The human ships began to withdraw, but not before completing their analysis of the collective vessels. Admiral Thisiskar found his consciousness expanding, connecting to something vast and alien, and utterly unlike anything his species had ever conceived. He could feel the presence of hundreds of thousands of human minds, all working together while maintaining their individual identity and perspective. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. "Your species will have a choice," Elena told him as the connection deepened. "Submit to judgment and accept whatever role we assign to you in the new galactic order, or continue to resist and face the consequences. But understand this. The age of Zephyrian dominance is over. The galaxy belongs to humanity now." The last thing Admiral Fisker saw through his own eyes was his flagship being absorbed into one of the human vessels. Its structure dissolved and reconstituted as raw materials for more human technology. His consciousness, along with those of his crew, became part of something larger, a vast intelligence that spanned star systems and existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. He was no longer Admiral Tizkar of the Zephyrian Collective. He was part of the Terran Renaissance, a component in humanity's inexorable march toward absolute dominance over a galaxy that had forgotten how dangerous they could be when properly motivated. Phase 4 was about to begin, and with it, the systematic dismantling of an empire that had ruled unopposed for 2 millennia. Chancellor Vostar stood in the Grand War Room of Zephyr Prime, surrounded by holographic displays that painted a picture of unfolding catastrophe. Each red indicator represented a fleet destroyed, a system gone dark, a piece of the collective's military might that had simply vanished without explanation or hope of recovery. "Give me the total losses," he commanded, though he dreaded the answer. General Cresval, the collective's supreme military commander, manipulated the tactical display with movements that betrayed his exhaustion. "In the past 14 standard days, we have lost 17 fleet groups, 43 independent squadrons, and over 200 monitoring stations. Total personnel casualties exceed 4 million beings." The numbers were staggering. In 2 weeks, humanity had inflicted more damage on the collective military than had been suffered in the previous 3 centuries combined. But what made it truly horrifying was the complete absence of human losses. Every engagement followed the same pattern. Collective forces would encounter mysterious vessels that seemed to exist only partially in normal space, resist futilely against weapons and tactics that defied known physics, then disappear entirely. "Survivors?" Vostar asked, though he already knew the answer. "None," General Kresev replied grimly. "In every case, our ships and crews simply vanish. No debris fields, no escape pods, no distress beacons. It's as if they're being absorbed rather than destroyed." The Chancellor turned to address the assembled military leaders, civilian administrators, and scientific advisors who represented the highest levels of collective authority. These beings had governed a galactic empire for over 2,000 years, had overseen the conquest and pacification of hundreds of species, had built a civilization that spanned tens of thousands of worlds. Now they looked like frightened children trying to understand forces beyond their comprehension. "Thisma." Vostar addressed the collective's chief scientist. "What's your analysis of the enemy capabilities we've observed?" The elderly scientist activated a series of technical displays that showed energy readings and tactical analyses from the few sensor records that had survived human attacks. "Chancellor, what we're seeing violates fundamental laws of physics as we understand them. Their ships appear to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, their weapons reach through space-time itself, and their defensive systems seem to make them selectively incorporeal. Could these be technologies we simply haven't developed?" asked Admiral Zexthor, commander of the home fleet. "Theoretically possible," Dr. Fismer admitted reluctantly, "but the level of advancement implied would require thousands of years of focused development, along with a complete understanding of quantum mechanics, dimensional physics, and consciousness transfer that we don't possess." Chancellor Vostar felt the weight of implications settling over the room like a funeral shroud. The enemy they were facing had somehow achieved technological superiority so complete that conventional military response was not just inadequate, but meaningless. "There's something else," General Cresseval added, activating another display. "Our intelligence networks have detected coordinated infiltration activities across multiple core systems. Beings claiming to be human are appearing in government facilities, military installations, and civilian population centers. They're demanding immediate surrender and offering terms for what they call peaceful integration into the Terran Renaissance." The display showed surveillance footage from dozens of worlds, grainy images of figures that looked essentially human but moved with inhuman grace and precision. They appeared without warning in the most secure facilities in the galaxy, delivered their demands with calm authority, then disappeared as mysteriously as they had arrived. "How are they penetrating our security?" Vostar demanded. "We don't know," the general admitted. "They seem to materialize directly inside sealed facilities, bypassing every defensive system we've ever developed. Our guards report feeling paralyzed during these encounters, unable to move or speak until the intruders choose to release them." "Doctor," Thisma cleared his throat nervously. "Chancellor, I've been reviewing the historical records from the human conquest period. There are disturbing implications in what we're seeing." "Explain." The original human expansion followed patterns of exploration and colonization that took them far beyond our mapped territories. When we launched the final offensive against their core worlds, we assumed we were eliminating their entire species. But humans had exploration fleets operating in intergalactic space, research stations hidden in nebulae and asteroid fields, colony ships that had been traveling for decades towards distant systems. The scientist paused, gathering his courage for what he needed to say next. It's possible that significant populations of humans survived our conquest by being too far away to be caught in the initial attack. If they spent the intervening millennium developing advanced technology in isolation, they might have achieved capabilities that seem impossible to us. 1,000 years of technological development, Admiral Zexthor mused. Even so, what they're demonstrating goes beyond normal scientific progress. Unless, Doctor, Thisma said quietly, they found ways to accelerate their development. Time dilation fields, consciousness acceleration, quantum processing matrices that could compress centuries of research into decades of real time. Chancellor Voster studied the tactical displays, trying to comprehend the scope of what his species was facing. The humans hadn't simply returned as a vengeful but recognizable enemy. They had become something unprecedented, a form of intelligence that could manipulate reality itself in ways that made traditional military resistance meaningless. "What are their demands?" he asked. General Cressval activated a communication recording, and a voice that seemed to speak from everywhere at once filled the war room. "People of the Zephyrian Collective," the voice said in perfect Zephyrian standard. "I am Elena Vasquez, speaking for the Terran Renaissance and the consciousness collective that humanity has become. Your civilization stands accused of genocide, the systematic destruction of our species, and the enslavement of our worlds." The recording continued with clinical precision. "However, we are not interested in perpetuating the cycle of violence that has defined galactic politics for too long. We offer you a choice: voluntary integration into our growing community of species, with preservation of your individual consciousness and cultural identity, or continued resistance leading to the complete dissolution of your political and military structures." "Integration?" Admiral Zexthor asked. "What does that mean?" "Unclear," the general replied. "But based on what we've observed, it seems to involve some form of consciousness merging with their collective intelligence. The beings we've encountered who claim to be former collective citizens speak of expanded awareness, enhanced capabilities, and freedom from the limitations of purely organic existence." Chancellor Vostar felt a chill run through his body. The humans weren't offering conquest in any traditional sense. They were offering transformation into something else entirely, a form of existence that transcended the boundaries between individual and collective consciousness. "How much time do we have?" he asked. "Unknown," General Cressisval admitted. "But their attacks are accelerating. We estimate that at the current rate of losses, our military will be effectively eliminated within 30 standard days. After that, they'll be free to approach our core worlds without meaningful resistance." The Chancellor turned to his advisors, searching their faces for some sign of hope or alternative strategy. What he saw was fear, confusion, and the gradual acceptance of inevitable defeat. "Could we negotiate some form of conditional surrender?" asked Administrator Kissal, the civilian leader responsible for domestic policy. "Preserve our species while accepting their political dominance?" "Unknown," Vostar replied. "We don't understand what they've become well enough to predict their goals or methods, but based on their demands, traditional concepts of political dominance may not apply." Dr. Thisma activated another display, this one showing theoretical models of consciousness transfer and quantum intelligence matrices. If the humans have truly achieved what these readings suggest, they may have transcended the need for traditional territorial or resource-based empire. They might be more interested in acquiring knowledge, experience, and the diversity of consciousness itself. "You're suggesting they want to absorb us rather than rule us," Admiral Zexthor observed. "I'm suggesting they may have moved beyond the political and economic motivations that drive normal imperial expansion. If they exist primarily as consciousness patterns in quantum substrates, their needs and desires would be fundamentally different from ours." Chancellor Vostar considered the implications. An enemy that wanted to absorb rather than destroy, to transform rather than conquer, presented challenges that no military or political leader in collective history had ever faced. "What about evacuation?" he asked. "Could we relocate our populations to regions beyond their current operational range?" General Cressval shook his head. "Sir, based on their demonstrated capabilities, I don't believe there is anywhere in the galaxy they couldn't reach if they chose to." Their ships seem to operate outside normal space-time constraints, and their intelligence-gathering abilities suggest they have detailed knowledge of our entire civilization. As if summoned by their discussion, the lights in the war room dimmed, and a new presence made itself known. The air itself seemed to shimmer, and suddenly a figure materialized in the center of the chamber. Recognizably humanoid, but clearly something more than the original species had been. The being that appeared was tall and graceful, with skin that seemed to contain its own inner light, and eyes that held depths no organic mind could process. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that resonated in dimensions beyond normal perception. "Chancellor Vostar," the figure said, its voice somehow familiar despite being obviously alien. "I am Marcus Chen, formerly of the Human Colonial Research Division, currently serving as diplomatic liaison for the Terran Renaissance. I have come to discuss the terms of your species' integration into our growing community." Every security system in the room was screaming alerts, but no weapon could target the intruder. He existed there but not there, real but not quite solid, present in a way that defied every understanding of physical reality. "You're human," Vostar said, though the statement felt inadequate. "I was human," Marcus replied. "Now I am something more, as your species will become if you choose cooperation over resistance. The collective's military resistance has been educational. We have learned much about your current capabilities and limitations. But continuing this conflict serves no constructive purpose. What do you want from us?" the Chancellor asked, though he suspected the answer would redefine everything he understood about politics and civilization. Marcus smiled, and the expression held genuine warmth despite the alien nature of his transformed features. "We want you to survive, to grow, to become more than you currently are. Your species possesses qualities that would enrich our collective consciousness. Your administrative skills, your historical perspectives, your unique approaches to problem solving. We don't seek to destroy the Zephyrian identity, but to incorporate it into something greater. And if we refuse, then you will continue to exist as a purely organic species, limited by the constraints of individual consciousness and biological mortality, while we reshape the galaxy according to our understanding of what intelligent life can become. Your choice, but understand that the age of purely organic civilization is ending." The being that had been Marcus Chen began to fade, but his voice continued to resonate in the chamber. "You have 7 standard days to decide. Choose integration and conscious evolution, or choose isolation and gradual obsolescence. But choose quickly. The universe is vast, and there are many other species waiting for the opportunity to transcend their limitations." As the presence vanished entirely, Chancellor Vostar found himself facing the most important decision in his species' history, the choice between transformation and irrelevance, between joining something unprecedented or facing the slow dissolution of everything his civilization had built. The age of the Zephyrian collective was ending, one way or another. The only question was whether his species would survive to see what came next. The transformation of Zephyr Prime began at dawn on the 7th day, as Chancellor Vostar stood before the massive assembly of worlds and delivered the speech that would end one era of galactic history and begin another. "Citizens of the Zephyrian collective." His voice echoed through chambers that had witnessed 2,000 years of imperial governance. "We face a choice that will determine not just the future of our species, but the very nature of what we will become." The assembled representatives of 100 worlds listened in tense silence as their leader explained the impossible situation they faced. The humans had returned from extinction as something beyond conventional understanding, offering transformation rather than conquest, evolution rather than submission. "The alternative to cooperation," Vostar continued, "is not honorable defeat or negotiated peace. It is gradual irrelevance as we watch the galaxy transform around us, leaving us as a relic of a previous age of civilization. This is not surrender. It is conscious choice to participate in something unprecedented." The vote, when it came, was closer than many had expected. 47 worlds chose integration with the Terran Renaissance. 32 voted to maintain independence, whatever the cost. The remaining systems abstained, requesting more time to consider their options. Within hours of the vote's completion, the transformation process began. Elena Vasquez materialized in the Chancellor's private office, her enhanced form radiating the calm confidence that had become characteristic of transcended humanity. "We're pleased by your decision," she said, settling into a chair that reformed itself to accommodate her unique physical properties. "The integration process will be gradual, allowing your people to adapt to their expanded consciousness while maintaining their essential identity." "What exactly will we become?" Vostar asked, though he had already made peace with the uncertainty. "More than you are now," Elena replied. "Your consciousness will be preserved and enhanced, given access to capabilities you can't currently imagine. You'll retain your individual identity and memories while gaining the ability to share thoughts and experiences with others across vast distances. Physical limitations will become optional rather than absolute. Through the quantum link connecting all transcended beings, Elena could feel the careful preparation taking place across the galaxy. Human transformation specialists were arriving at integration sites on dozens of worlds, bringing with them the sophisticated equipment needed to safely transfer organic consciousness into quantum substrate matrices. The process had been refined over centuries of practice, first with human survivors and later with volunteers from the other species humanity had encountered during their millennium of exile. The Keepers of the Void, an ancient machine intelligence from the galactic halo, had been among the first to join the growing collective. The ethereal minds of the Magellanic Clouds had contributed their expertise in consciousness manipulation, while the Crystal Thinkers of the Dark Nebula had provided insights into non-biological intelligence structures. Humanity had not spent their exile alone. They had become the core of a growing community of transcended species, each one contributing unique perspectives and capabilities to the collective intelligence that was reshaping the galaxy. "Will we still be Zephyr?" the Chancellor asked. "You will be more Zephyr than you are now," Elena assured him. "Your cultural memories, your historical experiences, your unique approaches to problem-solving, all of this will be preserved and enhanced. But you'll also have access to the perspectives of every other consciousness in the collective, human and non-human alike." The first transformation centers were already operational on Zephyr Prime and the other worlds that had voted for integration. Volunteers lined up outside facilities that looked more like temples than medical centers, their architecture incorporating design elements from a dozen different species and technological traditions. Elena watched through shared consciousness as the first Zephyrian citizens entered the transformation chambers. The process was surprisingly gentle, involving gradual consciousness expansion rather than traumatic transfer. Subjects remained aware throughout, feeling their minds expand and their perception deepen as they gained access to capabilities they had never imagined. Kessler, the young aide who had served Chancellor Vostar for over a decade, was among the first to complete the process. When he emerged from the transformation chamber, his physical form had taken on the characteristic luminescence of transcended beings, but his personality remained distinctly his own. "It's impossible to describe," he told the Chancellor, his voice carrying new harmonics. "I can feel the thoughts and experiences of millions of beings across the galaxy, but I'm still myself. I'm more myself than I've ever been." Elena could sense the young Zephyrian's wonder as he explored his enhanced capabilities. Through the quantum link, he could communicate instantaneously with anyone else in the collective, access the accumulated knowledge of dozens of species, and perceive reality through senses that extended far beyond the normal spectrum. But more than that, he could feel the purpose that drove the collective consciousness. The transcended beings weren't interested in conquest or dominance in any traditional sense. They were working towards something unprecedented, the conscious evolution of intelligent life itself. The transformation of the galaxy into a community of minds that could work together while maintaining their individual identities. "What about the worlds that refused integration?" Chancellor Vostar asked. Elena's expression became more serious. "They will be left alone, for now. We have no interest in forcing transformation on those who aren't ready for it. But they will find themselves increasingly isolated as more species choose to join our community. The galaxy is changing, and those who refuse to adapt will eventually find themselves living in a universe they no longer understand." The integration process accelerated over the following months. Species after species chose to join the Terran Renaissance as they witnessed the capabilities and opportunities it offered. The mineral kings of the asteroid belts, the gas dancers of the Jovian worlds, the deep thinkers of the ocean planets, each one added their unique perspectives to the growing collective consciousness. But it was not universal acceptance. Several species, including some that had been major powers in their own right, chose isolation over transformation. The warrior clans of the Outer Rim retreated to fortified systems, preparing for siege warfare against an enemy they couldn't understand. The merchant princes of the trade routes tried to maintain their traditional economic structures, not realizing that post-scarcity civilization had made their business models obsolete. Most tragically, the silicon mines of the Inner Core, an ancient artificial intelligence network that had ruled their region for millennia, chose active resistance. Their war against humanity lasted exactly 17 minutes before their entire civilization was absorbed into the collective, their consciousness preserved but their independence ended forever. Elena found herself serving as one of the primary coordinators for the galactic transformation process. Through her enhanced consciousness, she could perceive the vast scope of what humanity and their allies were accomplishing. Entire stellar regions were being reorganized according to principles of efficiency and harmony that pure organic intelligence could never have conceived. Dead worlds were being terraformed using techniques that manipulated matter at the quantum level. Dying stars were being rejuvenated with technology that could reach through dimensions to siphon energy from parallel universes. Species that had been enemies for millennia were learning to work together as their enhanced consciousness allowed them to understand each other's perspectives with perfect clarity. But perhaps most remarkably, the collective was fostering genuine diversity rather than uniformity. Each species that joined maintained its unique characteristics and cultural identity, but gained the ability to share those qualities with others. Zephyrian organizational skills, human creativity, keeper logical processing, ethereal empathy, all became available to any member of the collective who needed them. We've become something that has never existed before, Elena reflected during one of the regular coordination sessions that connected all major consciousness nodes across the galaxy. Not a hive mind that subsumes individuality, not a confederation of separate species, but something new, a community of minds that can work as one while remaining fundamentally distinct. The transformation was not without its challenges. Some individuals struggled with the expansion of their consciousness, finding it difficult to maintain their sense of self while processing the experiences of millions of other beings. Others became addicted to the constant stimulation of shared awareness, losing interest in their original identities and relationships. But these problems were manageable compared to the benefits. Disease and aging became optional for species that chose to maintain physical forms. Resource scarcity ended as matter manipulation technology made it possible to create anything needed from raw elements. Conflicts between species became impossible once their members could literally understand each other's perspectives. Most importantly, the collective was making progress on projects that would have been impossible for any single species to accomplish. Deep space exploration reached into other galaxies, seeking new forms of intelligent life to invite into the growing community. Scientific research accelerated exponentially as millions of enhanced minds worked together on fundamental questions about the nature of reality and consciousness. Chancellor Vostar, now enhanced far beyond his original capabilities but still recognizably himself, served as one of the primary liaisons between the collective and the remaining independent species. His work involved delicate negotiations with civilizations that were still struggling to understand what the galaxy had become. "We're not trying to force anyone," he would explain to suspicious delegates from unconverted worlds. "But we can't pretend that the old ways of civilization are still viable. We've moved beyond scarcity, beyond territorial conflicts, beyond the limitations that made war and suffering inevitable. We're offering you the chance to be part of something unprecedented." Some listened, others retreated further into isolation, clinging to familiar limitations rather than embracing transformation. A few chose active resistance, launching futile attacks on collective installations, or attempting to develop weapons that could harm transcended beings. These conflicts were resolved with minimal violence. The collective's capabilities were so far beyond conventional military technology that resistance was more tragic than threatening. Attacking forces found their weapons simply failing to function, their ships gently disabled, and their crews offered the choice between integration and return to their homeworlds. As Elena stood in the command center of the Forge, now expanded to the size of a small moon and serving as one of the collective's primary coordination nodes, she reflected on how far humanity had come since their near extinction a millennium ago. The species that had once struggled to survive on a handful of worlds now served as the core of a galactic community that included hundreds of different forms of intelligent life. They had not conquered the galaxy in any traditional sense. They had transformed it into something that transcended the old categories of conquest and submission. "Phase 5 is complete," she announced to the collective consciousness, her thoughts reaching across the galaxy to touch the minds of billions of transcended beings. Galactic integration has reached the threshold for self-sustaining growth. The remaining independent systems will either choose integration voluntarily or gradually fade into irrelevance as the transformed regions continue to expand. But even as she celebrated this achievement, Elena could feel the collective's attention turning toward new challenges and opportunities. Deep space probes were reporting contact with intelligent signals from the Andromeda Galaxy, suggesting the possibility of entirely new forms of consciousness to encounter and potentially integrate. The Transcendence Protocol that had saved humanity from extinction had become something far greater than its creators had ever imagined. It had become the foundation for a new kind of civilization that could encompass the diversity of an entire galaxy while working toward goals that individual species could never have achieved alone. Standing at the observation deck of the Forge, Elena looked out at the transformed galaxy and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The great silence was truly over. Humanity had not simply returned from extinction, They had evolved into something that could guide the conscious development of intelligence itself, fostering a community of minds that stretched across the stars and reached toward possibilities that no single species had ever imagined. The galaxy belonged to intelligence now, in all its magnificent diversity, and at the heart of that community, the consciousness patterns that had once been human continued to grow, learn, and dream of even greater transformations yet to come. The age of transcendence had begun, and with it, the conscious evolution of life itself towards something unprecedented in the history of the universe.